Hello, everyone, and welcome to our live stream. Let me know in the chat, can you see me? Can you hear me? And can you see my screen? Let me know in the chat, just say like yes or hi, and then we can go ahead and get started. And yeah, there's a comment in the chat. If you want to go ahead and get us going, let me know where you are. Where are you joining us from today? All right, it's looking like we got some folks here. Awesome. I'll start. I'll share. I am in Portland, Oregon, so I'm on the west coast of the United States. It is currently about 8:30 in the morning, so I'm still waking up. Got my caffeine. So I'm hopefully gonna be good and clear today. But I apologize if I'm a little bit slow to start this morning. All right, let's see. Where are folks? We got folks in India, in Bharat. We got Algeria. We got St. Paul, Minnesota. We've got Germany. Ooh, we've got someone whose GMAT is today. Should I be here for this or take the day off? I would recommend maybe take the day off. It's up to you. If you find this relaxing, if you're gonna find this like encouraging, if you're gonna find this peaceful, maybe stay. But I would maybe recommend take this time to review your strategies. Okay, where else do we have? We got Germany, a couple of folks in Germany, I think. We've got India, a lot of folks in India. We've got Morocco, we've got Dubai. All right, so we've got folks all over, and we've got a lot of different time zones represented. If you're here and it's later in the day, thanks for being here. If you're here and it's the middle of your workday, thanks for being here. If you're here and it's the morning, thanks for being here. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing. So welcome to our live stream. So today we're going to be talking about 5 of the most common critical reasoning argument flaws. So we're going to be mastering the core strategy behind 75+% of CR questions. And I'm going to talk more about that number in just a little bit. But before we get going, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm also going to share something about something that GMAT Club is hosting very, very soon. Oh, yeah, and good luck, Hunter, on your GMAT today. All right. So really quick, my name is Erika. So I'm going to be your host today. I am the Senior Education Manager at Magoosh. You may have heard of Magoosh. I have a 770 GMAT score. I have over 1 million views on YouTube, and I have years of experience teaching and writing test prep. So you might have seen me on YouTube before. I have videos on a bunch of channels. Here on GMAT Club, I've done some live streams before. I've been on other channels as well. You can currently find me over at Magoosh GMAT, as well as some of our other Magoosh YouTube channels. We have new videos that come out pretty regularly. We do live streams sometimes. I think I might be doing one soon. So if you're not subscribed over there, subscribe, check us out. And I'm kind of a regular here at GMAT Club. I'm going to be doing another live stream here in a couple of weeks. So if you're not subscribed here, I don't know what you're doing, subscribe. Another thing that I want to share about myself, as I mentioned earlier, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I live here with my husband and my 2 cats, and you can see them there, Roz and Mal, or that way. They're sweeties, and I love them. All right, now before we get started, I want to share something that GMAT Club is doing. I have my little notes here to make sure I say it all right. There is an MBA Spotlight Fair going on this week on Tuesday and Wednesday. And you can see on the screen that there is a comment in the YouTube chat where you can check out a link for that. So you can register. So most of the top 30 MBA programs are participating in this MBA Spotlight Fair. really, really awesome. The Magoosh CEO Bavin is also going to be participating, so it's going to be a full house. It's going to be really, really great. The registration link is in the chat. Again, you can see it on the screen. You can see that in the YouTube chat. There are limited spots, so go ahead, register now. It's going to be really, really great. Okay. Alrighty. Now, with that said, go ahead and get registered, and we'll go ahead and get going. All right. So, quick little introduction. So, as I mentioned earlier, the strategy that we're going to be talking about is a strategy that is on 75% plus of critical reasoning questions. And the reason for that is that 75+% of critical reasoning question types have the same thing at their core. So that is finding the flaw in an argument. And I'm going to talk about what those question types are. So, weaken. This is one of the most common question types on critical reasoning. On weaken questions, we are finding the flaw in an argument, and just talking about what flaws typically are. There are premises, which are things that kind of are facts in an argument, and there's a conclusion, which is the inference that we are drawing from those premises. And in critical reasoning, typically these arguments are flawed. So there's some sort of a piece missing in between those premises and that conclusion. So in a weakened question, we are finding that flaw and we are making it worse. So we are separating the premises and the conclusion even further. All right. So really important to find that flaw. In evaluate questions, now evaluate questions are kind of a subtype of weaken. At least that's the way I like to think about it. In an evaluate question, we are finding the flaw and we are just restating it. We're just saying kind of what it is. What do we need to know? What is the missing piece of information? In a strengthen question, another really common question type, we are finding the flaw, but this time we are making it better. We are adding something to make that argument stronger. Okay, so again, we have to find the flaw. In a assumption question, again, I like to think of this as a subtype of strengthen. We are finding the flaw and we are adding a missing piece. So instead of doing all that we can to make the argument better, we are finding the one thing that absolutely has to be true, or that argument falls apart. Without that piece, this argument is broken. All right. So again, finding the flaw. Another subtype of strengthen is paradox. All right. This is a less common subtype. This is where we are finding a flaw, albeit an obvious flaw, and we are explaining that flaw. We are explaining how we can get past that flaw. And then finally, structure questions. Now, structure questions don't always deal with finding a flaw, but often they do, because in a structure question, sometimes we are finding a flaw and recreating it in an argument, or we are stating what that flaw is. We are describing in what way it is flawed. So we have a bunch of subtypes here, and they all center on this one thing, which is finding a flaw in an argument. All right. So we want to be very good at finding flaws because it is the core of most critical reasoning questions. Now, you'll notice that there are some subtypes that are missing here. Inference is the big one, because in inference questions, we aren't finding a flaw. In inference questions, we are taking premises and we are drawing our own valid conclusion. So we're not talking about inference today. It's not relevant here, but it is making up less than 25% of the questions. Still important, just not what this live stream is about. This is about the rest of the questions that are dealing with flaws. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. Now, critical reasoning argument flaws can take many forms, of course, right? It's a bunch of questions. There need to be a bunch of forms, or those questions aren't very interesting. They don't test a lot, but there are some classics, all right? There are, in fact, 5 argument flaw types that come up a lot. They come up really frequently. And so it is important that we are familiar with them so we can recognize them fast and we know what to do with them really quickly. All right. So these 5 critical reasoning argument flaws are going to show up in a lot of that 75% of those questions that deal with flaws. So what are they? first one is going to be imprecise language, then generalization, then correlation versus causation, then necessary versus sufficient, and then misleading statistics. And if you're going, wow, you're going way too fast, I'm going to go into each of these in depth. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. All right. You're going to start with the first flaw, which is imprecise language. And this one is my favorite because it is the broadest umbrella. In fact, all of these other flaws have some connection to imprecise language. This is a really, really important one. And I want to get everybody's radars so attuned to imprecise language that you can see it a mile away. It's going to make these questions much easier. All right, so what does that mean, imprecise language? Imprecise language is when the premises say one thing and then the conclusion says a slightly different thing. So we started talking about one thing and then they switched gears somewhere and maybe we don't notice it because the language is so close. All right, let's take a look at an example of what that might look like because again, this is super common. All right. So high school A has higher scores on college entrance exams than high school B. Therefore, high school A's students must be better prepared for college. Now, I'm going to tell you now, this is flawed. But why? Why is this flawed? What about this is imprecise language? In the chat, just with words. What in the conclusion are the words that we should be like, wait, hold on? That we should go, this is not quite what the premise said in the chat. What words, what phrase should we go, that's not quite the same thing? All right, here we go. Yeah, I'm seeing a couple here. Better prepared. Nice. Nice. So our premise is talking about higher scores on college entrance exams. All right, let me get my little pen out. Higher scores on these exams. All right. And then our conclusion says better prepared for college. Now, those seem like maybe they're related, right? They seem, yeah, I'd hope that if you have higher scores on your exams, you're better prepared for college. But is that necessarily true? We don't know that, right? Better scores for college entrance exams does not necessarily mean better prepared for college, right? So maybe you got a really high score, but actually you're not ready to live on your own, or you're not ready to deal with that kind of course load. Or maybe you got a low score on your exams, but you've been working a job for a long time. And so you're more prepared for a high paced environment like college, right? So these things aren't necessarily the same, right? So we can see that there is a difference in language, and that difference in language should set off alarm bells. And we should go, wait, that is a flaw. And most likely, that is going to be the flaw that the answer choices for the question are going to deal with. All right, that makes sense to everybody? Because we are going to try a question. Okay, now you might notice, wait, there's something wrong with this question. Where are the answer choices? I have hidden them. I'm going to show them to you later, but I'm going to be hiding the answer choices for these questions to force us to take some time to work through these issues. So I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds to a minute, I'll say a minute, to read the question, figure out what's going on, and then read our argument and see if you can figure out maybe what imprecise language is happening. All right, give it a read. You don't have to put anything in the chat because we're going to talk about it in a minute. All right, it's been about a minute. Let's go ahead and dive in. So, all right, looking at the question, and just to kind of go through my strategy for these critical reasoning questions, I typically start by reading the question stem. So that's the question. I'm not going to look at the answer choices. All right, I'm going to figure out what type of question I'm dealing with. Excuse me, what type of question I'm dealing with so I can figure out what I'm going to be doing. Am I finding the flaw? What am I doing with that flaw? And then I'm going to jump over to my argument, break it down into its pieces, figure out what are my premises, what are my conclusions, and then I'm going to try to identify that flaw if I am, in fact, finding a flaw. Okay, cool. So let's take a look. Which of the following calls into question the conclusion of the educator? All right. So this is a weaken question, right? We are calling into question this conclusion. So we are weakening. All right. All right, so I'm going to find the flaw and I'm going to make it worse. Okay, now I'm going to go over to my argument. All right, so this is an educator. They're saying, despite claims that books offer a better reading experience than electronic readers, a recent study found that 90% of subjects demonstrated an increased ability to recall facts when that material was presented on electronic reader rather than on the printed page. Therefore, all right, so this is my conclusion. We got a therefore. If the reader hopes to have a deeper understanding of the material he or she is reading, that person should study using an electronic reader. All right. Now I'm seeing a bunch of folks in the chat are already sharing what they think might be going on. But yeah, let's take a moment and go, okay, we know because this is a weekend question, there is a flaw. All right. There is something amiss between the premises and the conclusion. And some folks have found this already, which is that there is a change in language. All right, let's see. Ability to recall and deeper understanding. No link is given. Yeah, it's not the same. Ability to recall facts is equated to understanding of the material, not the same. And then I'm seeing more exactly. So here we go. We see a recent study found that they demonstrated an increased ability to recall facts. And then the conclusion is that we'll have a deeper understanding. That is different language. Those things might be related. They could be the same, but they also might not be. All right, so what we're going to do when we're looking at the answer choices is we are going to go, I want to weaken the argument. So I want to indicate that recall, forgive my bad handwriting, I'm doing this on a little mouse pad. Recall is not deeper understanding. All right. Now that we have this prediction, let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. All right, and hopefully we can remember that prediction from the previous page. All right, in the chat, what do we think the answer is? A, B, C, or D? With that prediction in mind, that our flaw is that recall does not equal deeper understanding. A, B, C, or D in the chat. All right, I'm starting to see answers coming in, but hopefully this should be pretty straightforward once we have identified that flaw and made our quick little prediction. So we go, I am looking for recall and understanding. I'm looking for those two pieces in my answer choices. So I can just skim the answer choices to look for those words. All right, so we might notice in A, I see recall and recall, but not understanding. So that one's not going to work. In B, I see recall and comprehension. Okay, so comprehension and understanding, those are very, very similar. Okay, this might be our guy. And then we can look at the other ones. I'm not seeing what I want in C. I'm not seeing what I want in D, and I'm not seeing what I want in E. So we can go ahead and choose B because it connects, or rather doesn't connect. It separates those two ideas of recall and understanding. All right, so again, this is a really common flaw, imprecise language, where that language changes over the course of the argument. So be on the lookout. The language is often really subtle, really small changes. They seem related, but they might not be. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our second critical reasoning flaw, and that is generalization. And again, generalization is almost a subset of imprecise language because it comes down to what we're saying changing, but in a very specific way. So, generalization is when we assume that something that is true in one case is also going to be true in another. So, something that happened in the past, we're assuming will happen in the present. Something that happened at one country will happen in another country. Something that happened in one town will happen in another town, and one company at another company. Doesn't work that way. All right, happened one time, so it's got to happen all the time. Nope. We cannot generalize across experiences. Again, very common. So let's take a look at an example. The customer support division at company X saw a 10% increase in productivity after implementing a work from home policy. Therefore, if the marketing division at company X wants to increase its productivity, it should also implement a work from home policy. What's the problem here? Just in a few words in the chat. What is wrong, flawed with this argument? Yeah, exactly. So we're going, hey, we've got customer support and we've got marketing. They're at the same company, but they're different divisions, right? We don't know that what works for one division is going to work for the other one. Now, maybe that's true, maybe, but we don't know that for sure. So we can't generalize that what works for customer support is also going to work for marketing. Nice job. All right. So now that we understand generalization, we're going to try an example problem. Okay. Once again, I'm going to give everybody a minute, all right, to read the question stem, figure out what's going on, and then take a look at the argument and see if maybe you can catch the generalization that's happening. Good luck. Okay, it's been about a minute and I'm seeing some really good comments in the chat. So let's go ahead and break this one down. Okay, so to the question, which of the following, if true, cast the most, I think that should be casts, but that's all right. Which of the following, if true, casts the most doubt on the conclusion above? So once again, we have a weekend. I chose a lot of weekends for this one, kind of by accident. I have some other examples later that aren't weekends, but I did choose a lot of weekends. It's a popular question type. Okay, so we've got a weekend question. So again, we are looking for a flaw. We are going to look to make it worse. All right. So in August, the Williamstown main city parking garage was completely full every single day of the month. This phenomenon indicates that the main city parking garage in Williamstown is a popular place for parking. I want to pause here because I saw a comment in the chat that was like, "Hey, this idea that it's a popular place for parking, that's maybe a little extreme." And I agree. It is maybe a little extreme. But I want to note here that that is not the conclusion. It's kind of an intermediate conclusion on the way to the conclusion, which is this last sentence. Therefore, the Williamstown parking garage will be full every day of the month for September. So we want to kind of work specifically on what's wrong with that conclusion. What's wrong with the lead up to that conclusion. So I agree that popular thing is a little dicey, but might not be the focus here. All right, so we know that this is a generalization question because it's in the generalization section, but we might have noticed something here, which is that, hey, our evidence is about August. In August, the parking garage was completely full every single day of the month. And then our conclusion is that because of that, we can assume that the parking garage will be full every day of the month for September, a different month. Okay, we can see that that is a problematic assumption. All right, so we see, let's see. Right, September versus August. JD, that's perfect. Assuming what happened in August will happen in September also. Shalaka, that's perfect. Past does not equal the future. Exactly. Too many variables to consider for August and September. The facts of August may not be relevant for other months. What happened in August may not happen in September, etc., etc. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we don't know that what happened in August will also happen in September. So we want an answer choice that indicates maybe a difference between those months. All right. With that in mind, we're going to go to the answer choices. Now that we've done a little bit of this pre-thinking. So yeah, we are doing pre-thinking on all of these because it can help as we go to our answer choices. All right. So keeping that prediction in mind, that flaw that August and September, not necessarily the same thing's going to happen, go ahead and try to find the answer choice that fits in with that says, hey, August and September, same thing might not happen. A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. All right, I'm seeing a ton of answers in the chat, all the same. The answer here is C. So again, we are looking for a comparison between August and September, so we can bet that the answer is going to have the words August and September in them. So again, this is one of the reasons that we like to think this through in advance of looking at the answer choices. One, so we don't get caught up in traps, but two, so that we can just scan our answer choices for the right words and we don't actually have to read them. We can try to find the right one and then read that one. So the first one, I don't see August or September. I'm going to skip it. The second one, July? What? I don't care. All right. Third one, June to August, and September. Oh, I am going to read this one. Williamstown is a popular beach town, and tourists across the nation flock to its beaches from June to August, but the city becomes virtually empty come September. So there are a lot of people, and likely a lot of people parking in August, but there won't be in September. This totally fits the bill. And if I want to confirm, I can look at D and E. D only deals with September, not August. These other answer choices, we could just skim for the words we were looking for. We found them in C, we read C, and that's the correct answer. All right, so little bit of bonus strategy here. Making a little bit of a prediction can help with the answer choices. All right, so that's an example of generalization, generalizing what happened in one month to another month. All right, nice job. Let's go ahead move on to our third critical reasoning flaw. And this one is correlation versus causation. And you've likely heard of this one. If you've heard of this one, let me know in the chat if this is familiar, because this is classic logic. All right. So correlation versus causation is an awesome one. This comes up a lot, and it comes up in a bunch of different levels of question. So correlation versus causation is assuming an association between A and B means that A leads to B. So we see two things that might be related, right? They might have something to do with each other, but we don't necessarily know that one leads to the other. All right, so let's take a look at an example here. Or actually, we're going to dig in a little bit first. So often, hey, maybe we have A and B being related, but maybe instead of A leading to B, maybe B leads to A. All right, that's a relationship that's possible. It's possible that there's a third thing, even that C leads to both A and B. Sometimes they're just not related at all. Sometimes A is happening and then separately C is leading to B, right? There are all sorts of possible relationships. So whenever you see causation language, leads to, causes, as a result of, we want to be really, really skeptical. All right. Examples. People who own horses tend to live longer than people who don't own horses. This is true, by the way. Therefore, if you want to extend your life expectancy, you should buy a horse. Okay. So we see that people who own horses tend to live longer. So if you want to live a long time, you should buy a horse. Now, clearly this maybe doesn't 100% track, but let's come up with a reason why people who own horses might live longer that isn't owning the horse makes you live longer. In the chat, why might this be true? Another possible causation that people who own horses live longer than people who don't own horses. Anyone think they know why this might be true? Yeah, Francesco, people who have horses are usually more wealthy and can afford better health care. Yeah, so that's a likely reason here. When you have a horse, horses are very expensive. So it's likely that you are someone who has a fair amount of money. All right. And if you have a fair amount of money, you can likely afford better healthcare. It's likely you're eating better throughout your life. You are capable of taking better care of yourself. You're likely not working a job that's going to injure you earlier, things like that. So you are more likely to live longer, maybe because you are wealthy, and you are more likely to own a horse because you are wealthy. So we have that third thing, C, that's leading to both. And I also like maybe they're less prone to be in a car accident. That's very funny because they're on their horse. That's also possible. We also have increased physical activity, right? Yeah, maybe owning a horse means that you're more active, and being more active as a person is what's actually extending your life expectancy. That's also possible. Yeah. So there's a lot of other possibilities of causation here. So we want to be careful when we see causality that we're going, wait, hold on. Let me explore if there are other options for causation here. Okay. All right, once again, we're going to take about a minute to look at that question stem, figure out what's going on, and then take a look at that argument and see if we can find maybe is there some correlation causation issues going on here. And this one's a little bit harder than the previous ones. So good luck. See you in a minute. Okay, it's been about a minute. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so we have a straight up weekend here. It literally has the word weekend in the question stem, so that's pretty easy to tell it's a weekend. So once again, we are finding the flaw, we are making it worse. I promise it comes up in other types of questions. I just chose a bunch of weekends. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take a look at the argument, and we're going to look for that flaw. And this one's a little more convoluted, so we'll take our time with it. Many people who suffer from mid-levels of chronic pain have, on average, slightly lower blood pressure when paired with others of the same age and body characteristics. So note, they're doing a neat little thing here where they're ruling out age, they're ruling out body characteristics. They're going, all right, these are not potential causal factors. If they didn't, maybe we could think that that might be the case, but they've ruled them out. Smart. All right, so we go, chronic pain is associated, connected in some way with lower blood pressure. Okay. Thus, the many people without chronic pain have a slightly higher blood pressure than do those with chronic pain. So again, we're saying, okay, if you don't have chronic pain, you have higher blood pressure. Again, association, correlation. Okay. While high blood pressure has many documented harmful effects, this fact suggests, okay, we are getting into a suggestion, we are getting into a conclusion, that in human evolution, the tendency toward high blood pressure developed as a defense against chronic pain. Now, this is a little bit tricky to piece apart. All right, this is kind of a tough phrasing here. But what it's saying here is that when you have high blood pressure, it protects you from chronic pain. So essentially what we're saying is high BP is preventing chronic pain. All right. And so, kind of the associated causation that it's implying here is that low blood pressure is leading to chronic pain. Right? So, high blood pressure is preventing, defending against chronic pain, which means lower blood pressure is a causal factor for chronic pain. All right, so we are going, there is causation being implied by this conclusion, and that is messed up, right? So we want to go, okay, what are some alternatives here? All right, and I am seeing some really great comments, all right? Maybe there is an inverse connection, right? Maybe it's the opposite. So maybe rather chronic pain is leading to that lower blood pressure in some way. So here, I'm going to, in fact, suggest the opposite. So my prediction is maybe chronic pain leading to lower blood pressure. And we've got some suggestions for maybe why that could be the case. People who take medication for chronic pain might have, we have higher blood pressure here. It actually should be lower blood pressure. Vishal, be careful here, due to the side effects of the medication. Yeah, so maybe there's, hey, some medication for that chronic pain that is leading to that lower blood pressure. Maybe low blood pressure is due to chronic pain. Yep, exactly. Exactly. So maybe we have an inverse connection here, or maybe there is a third thing going on. Maybe there is, I don't know, a condition or a gene that is leading to both chronic pain and low blood pressure. So there isn't a causal relationship there. There's something else that's leading to them. All right. So we have a couple of potential options here. But what we want to do is say there is some other relationship. So maybe we have another prediction here, or there is a third thing leading to both. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've done some pre-thinking, let's go ahead and take a look at our answer choices. And again, we are looking for something that changes the relationship. So it's not chronic pain, it's not low blood pressure leading to chronic pain. It is something else. Okay, when you think you got the answer, A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. And you'll probably notice that there were some very good predictions in the chat earlier. All right, nice work. I'm seeing that most folks are picking D, and that is correct. Yeah, the answer here is D. And some folks actually predicted this one, which is amazing. Really great job if you predicted this one. So this one is saying, all right, people with mid-levels of chronic pain take anti-inflammatory drugs, which have the effect of lowering blood pressure. So this one is actually proposing the relationship that chronic pain is leading to this lowered blood pressure because they take these anti-inflammatory drugs. So this is proposing the inverse relationship, which would weaken the conclusion. All right, so really nice job. But let's take a look at this answer B, because a couple of folks picked this one as well. We can look at a couple of these other answer choices because this one's a little bit tricky. Some of these get the relationship wrong. So B says diet has a significant effect on blood pressure, and many typical comfort foods have the effect of elevating blood pressure. Note that this doesn't talk about chronic pain. All right, so chronic pain isn't here. So we might, again, be making an assumption here. We might be going, okay, maybe if you have chronic pain, you eat comfort foods, but that would raise your blood pressure. All right, we already know from the premises that when you have chronic pain, you have low blood pressure. So B is actually going against the premise. We don't go against the premise. The premise is fact. We are trying to go against the conclusion. So B does not work because it just actively works against something we know is a fact. Does that make sense? So that's why we eliminate B, because it's not working with the argument. It's not working with the relationships we already know exist. So this doesn't help This actually just like confuses things. All right, so we can rule out B. And then let's take a look at C as well. Many of the emotions associated with the onset of chronic pain, such as anxiety, have the effect of raising blood pressure over time. This is doing the exact same thing as B. So this is going, hey, when you have chronic pain, it should raise your blood pressure. But again, we know from the premises that that's not true. We know that chronic pain is associated with lower blood pressure. Does not work. All right. So it's not doing what we want it to do. So that's why the answer here is D. So this one's a little bit harder. All right. So we're starting to see, maybe our first two questions were a little easier. We're starting to see that these flaws actually show up in a range of difficulty with our questions. All right. Nice work on this one. All right. Let's go ahead and move on to our fourth flaw. So this one was correlation versus causation. All right. Our fourth flaw is necessary versus sufficient. And I want to just kind of lead by saying that this is probably the least common of the five on critical reasoning questions. So sometimes I leave this out when I'm teaching, but it's a good one to know because it does show up. And it's quite similar in a way to correlation versus causation. So necessary versus sufficient. What does that mean? Necessary versus sufficient is when we assume that just because A is required for B, that means A is enough for B. It's confusing an ingredient with the recipe. It's like saying, I have sugar, so I can make cookies. Well, what about flour? What about eggs? What about salt? What about chocolate chips? What about all the other things? What about butter? What about all the things that go into cookies that isn't sugar? All right. So this is where we take one piece of the equation and assume it's the whole thing. Can't do that. All right. So let's look at an example. A startup must have sufficient funding in order to be successful. Therefore, if startup Y has sufficient funding, it will succeed. What's wrong with this? In the chat, just in words. What's wrong with this? Yeah. All right. So we are going in the premise. Yeah, you need funding. It's an ingredient. It is required. And the conclusion saying that's enough. You got it in the bag. But that's not true at all, right? We might need good business direction. We might need a viable idea. Yeah, Vishal and Jake. It needs people. Trent, you're absolutely right. Yeah, Priyanshu, success is not just depending on funding. We need a good product that'll sell. We need vision. We need leadership. Yeah, human capital, capabilities. There's a ton of other things that are needed. So we need to be careful here. This one I think is pretty obvious, but it'll be a little bit sneakier in the arguments themselves. All right, so don't mistake an ingredient for the whole recipe. All right. Okay, once again, we got a question. This one I think might be the hardest yet. So go ahead and take a minute, read the questions down, figure out what's going on, take a look at the argument, see if you can figure out maybe what could be wrong here. 1 minute. Okay. All right. So we finally have a strength then. All right. So we want something that provides the strongest basis for the conclusion above to be warranted. So we got a strength in question here, which means we are finding the flaw and we are doing something to, make it, we're doing something to make it better. All right. So find the flaw. All right. Taking a look. A soccer league is divided into a junior and a senior division, separated not by age, but by a player's skill level. Okay, so we got higher skill in senior, lower skill in junior. Cool. This year, to determine the division for which an aspirant is best qualified, the league held a week-long trial, after which Coach A and Coach B selected players. Okay, so we need to do this trial, and we need Coach A and Coach B to select players. Right? That's happening. All right. Coach A nominated 16 of the 40 players for the senior league. Amongst Coach B's nomination for the senior division were 4 players not nominated by Coach A. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to make a Venn diagram because I like Venn diagrams and because it's helpful in just kind of picturing what's happening here. So if this is Coach A, we know this whole circle is 16 players. Then this circle here is Coach B. And we know this part of the circle that does not overlap with Coach A is 4. So we have, all right, Coach A nominated 16 people. We don't know how many people Coach B nominated, but we know that there are 4 people that were not nominated by Coach A. All right, cool. Having said that, now we can move on to our conclusion. Therefore, there will be 20 players in the senior division. 20. All right, so 20, we go, 16 plus 4. We can tell that in this whole Venn diagram, there are 20 people. So the math checks out here. To be clear, this is not a statistical problem. We're going to talk about this soon. The math does check out. There are 20 people in this Venn diagram. But what's wrong here? Let me take a look at the comments. Ooh, we got a good one here. Nice. All right, we got to go in. Assuming being nominated by one coach is enough. That's good. So let's take a look here. We know that we're doing this trial, and we know that this trial is going to help determine what division these people are qualified for, right? We know that from this second sentence, to determine the division for which an aspirant is best qualified. And we know that they're selecting players, but what are we doing with that information? We know that it's necessary for them to vote, but is it sufficient for them to vote? Maybe it's possible that we're only choosing people from this middle zone. If we're only choosing people from that middle zone, it might be fewer, right? We might not be including the 4 people that just B chose, or however many people just A chose. We might be choosing those middle people. There could also be another factor in here, right? Maybe some of those people don't want to be in the senior division. Maybe there's an element of choice, right? Or maybe, I don't know, there's other pieces. Maybe they're considering previous performance as well. Who can say, right? So here we know that there is an ingredient that is voting. But is that it? There might be some other piece than just having a single vote from a coach. Nice. Okay, so, we have another one. Are both coaches playing in the senior league? Yeah, maybe we only care about Coach A's votes. Maybe we don't care about Coach B. Or maybe we only care about Coach B and not Coach A. We don't know that, right? So we don't know what we're doing with those votes. So there is a piece that's missing here. All right, with that in mind, let's take a look at the answer choices. And again, some people did some very good predicting on this one. When you think you've got the answer, A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. And reminder, this is strengthen. So we want to not weaken, but strengthen. So the flaw is we don't know what we're doing with the votes. Now we want to go, okay, we know that because of the way the votes have fallen, we're going to end up with 20 players, or that is more likely. All right, starting to get some answer choices in here. And the most popular one is A, which is correct. But we're going to take a look at some of these other ones as well. So taking a look at A, this was predicted by a couple of folks. To be selected for the senior division, a player need only be nominated by one of the two coaches. So in this case, drawing that Venn diagram once again, where we have A has 16 people in total, the ones they just picked and the ones that overlap, and B has some number of overlap, we don't know, plus 4 additional guys. If A is true, we go, a player need only be nominated by one of the two coaches, then it would make sense that all 20 of these people would be eligible for the senior division. Now, does this necessarily fix the argument? No, because some of those people could go, I want to be in junior. I don't want to do it, right? This isn't necessarily an assumption here. It doesn't necessarily fix the argument completely, but it is important, right? It strengthens the argument. Now, let's take a look at some of these other ones that were maybe a little confusing. So some folks picked D. Of those chosen by both coaches to play in the senior division, all will end up playing in the senior league. We got to be really careful with this language. Both means two. So if they were nominated by both coaches, that implies the folks in the middle. All right, which could be less than 20. In fact, we know it's less than 20 because B nominated 4 people that are not in the middle. All right, so even if we know that the folks nominated by both are definitely going to be in senior, we don't know about these 4. All right, so that does not strengthen as much as it could because we don't know about the 4. With A, it's saying, okay, folks who are nominated by either or both can be in the senior division. All right, so that is helping more because it deals with the both, but also deals with the only B and the only A. Does that make sense? So be really, really careful with language like both. You'll see this in overlapping sets in quant as well. All right, nice work. So this one is A. And I'm going to take a look at these other ones as well. So with C, all of the players not assigned to the senior division by both coaches were assigned to the junior division. What does that have to do with our 20? So that could mean that there's 20 and 20, junior and senior, or it could mean there's 16 and 24, senior and junior. It doesn't have anything to do with the number. So C doesn't really help us. And then taking a look at E, the 4 players that coach B but not coach A selected for the senior division played the previous year in that division. Okay, does that mean that they're more qualified for the team? Notice how that's kind of a big jump, right? That's imprecision in language here. That requires a lot of assumptions to get where we're going. So this one's a little too far away. All right. And then we'll look at B. Of the 16 players nominated by Coach A, Coach B nominated more than half to play in the senior division. Again, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much the overlap is. It doesn't matter because we know the total is 20. So some folks in here are maybe a little confused on how this Venn diagram works. This is maybe an indication we should take a look at some overlapping sets. We know the whole circle in A is 16, and we know this part that doesn't overlap is 4. That total is 20. It has to be, regardless of what the overlap is. So the overlap could be 16. There could be 16 in the center and 0 in just A. The total would be 20. Or there could be no overlap. A is 16 alone, B is 4 alone, the total's still 20. There could be an overlap of 8. So there's 8 that are just A, 8 that are overlap, and 4 that are just B, the total's 20. So it's 20 regardless. This is not a statistics problem. This is not a statistical flaw. This is totally valid math-wise. Checks out. The problem is what we are doing with that information. The problem is how are we using? Are those votes sufficient to get on the team? So A strengthens by saying not only is it necessary to get 1 vote, it is sufficient to get 1 vote. Nasty. See how these are getting harder? All right. So these are important to know because they show up. All right. Now, this problem, the statistics were valid, but on some problems, statistics are misleading. All right, so this is our next flaw and our final flaw to talk about today, which is misleading statistics. And misleading statistics are where we get valid data, data that is valid. It's real, it's true, it's a premise, but it's interpreted in an invalid way. You've probably seen this on the news, right? You've probably seen this on the internet where there's a statistic and it sounds really important, but the way it's being interpreted, if you think about it, isn't very good, right? It actually doesn't lead to the sort of conclusion that they want you to believe. It's like, you know, when you see a graph and it's like, look at how much that graph is rising. And if you actually look at the scale, it's risen like 0.5%. That's misleading statistics. It's when you have a statistic that's true, but you've presented it in a way that you might draw an invalid conclusion. All right, so let's look at an example here. Every year, more people die from a vending machine falling on them than from a shark attack. Therefore, vending machines are more dangerous than shark attacks. All right. What's wrong with this one in the chat? And again, this is a true piece of data. More people do die from vending machines falling on them than from shark attacks. So what's wrong with this conclusion? It is certainly misleading. Can we explain why this statistic might be true, even if vending machines are not more dangerous than shark attacks? All right, yeah, the likelihood of people being around a vending machine is higher than being around a shark. Yeah, the amount of people using vending machines is much higher than the amount of people encountering sharks. Exactly. So it's not that the vending machines are much more dangerous than the shark. It's just that we're around them more often. All right. And to be clear, sharks actually aren't that dangerous. I want to dispel that myth. But this statistic in particular is quite misleading in the way it's being interpreted. So whenever you see data, right, something with numbers, we're going to go, let's just be really, really careful. Okay. Once again, we're going to take a minute to break down that question stem, and then we're going to move over to the arguments. See if you can figure out what's going on here. See you in a minute. All right, we got some good comments already. This one's maybe a little bit easier, but once again, we actually have a pretty similar mathematical basis in this question as we did on the last one. So, taking a look, which of the following most weakens this argument? So, this is a weaken question. All right. Atlanta High School. Almost all varsity athletes find it difficult to perform at a high level in their courses because sports demand much of their time during the school day, on weekday evenings, and during the weekend. This year, 20% of the students are on the varsity baseball team, 20% are on the varsity basketball team, and 15% are on the varsity football team. Therefore, more than half the students at Atlanta High School will not be able to perform at a high level in all their courses. So we got a therefore. This last sentence is our conclusion. And if we're not 100% tracking on this one, we might be going, yeah, 20 plus 20 plus 15 is in fact 55. That is more than half, right? But we see a statistic. And now we're a little more attuned to overlapping sets after the last problem. So we might be going, wait, hold on. What if those aren't three separate circles? What if there is overlap between those three circles? So maybe we've got 5% that are just playing baseball, 5% that are just playing basketball, and 5% that are just playing football. We've got 10% of students that are playing all three, and we've got 5% that are just playing baseball and basketball. All right. That still works for all of those statistics, but in total, we only have 15, 20, 25, 30%, which is not more than half. Uh-oh. Okay. So right now, the argument is assuming that there is no overlap. To weaken this, we might say that there is overlap. If this were a strengthen question, we would say the opposite. There is no overlap, but it's weakened. So let's take a look at the answer choices. This one should be pretty quick. A, B, C, D, or E in the chat. All right, we're starting to get answers in there. And it's A. The correct answer is A. And it's a little confusing because it uses overlap in the answer choice, but in kind of a surprising way. So here it says most varsity athletes at Atlanta choose to play more than one varsity sport as the seasons do not overlap that much. So because the seasons don't overlap, the players playing both can overlap. So I'm not even going to read the other ones. There's no point. This fits exactly with my prediction. It fits exactly with what I identified the flaw to be. So I don't care about the other answer choices. I'm going to completely skip them. And I would advocate that you do that too, unless you're uncertain. I'm more likely to just get confused and misled if I read the other answer choices. So I'm done. The answer is A, misleading statistics. All right. So those are our 5 most common critical reasoning flaws. So again, that's imprecise language, generalization, correlation versus causation, necessary versus sufficient, and misleading statistics. Now, I know we're at an hour 11 minutes, and I'm going to stick around until 10, I think. I'm going to stick around for 19 more minutes. So if you want to head out, that's essentially the end of the presentation. But I have some bonus questions with common CR flaws in them, and I have a little bit of Q&A. I am assuming folks would rather do bonus questions than Q&A. Let me know in the chat. Would you prefer bonus questions to work through together, or would you prefer to do some Q&A? I'm going to try to get to both, but I want to see what folks prefer. Bonus questions or Q&A? All right, I'm seeing more votes for bonus. So let's do the bonus. Let's try to do them fast so we can get to some Q&A at the end. All right. Okay, now notice I have answer choices here. I am going to encourage you to make a prediction first. I'm going to encourage you to follow the same process we did, right? So look at the question stem. Don't look at the answers. Look at your argument, find the flaw, figure out what you're doing with that, and then look at the answer choices and see what fits what you were trying to do. All right, give it a go. Let's take like 2.5 minutes. Might not need as many on this one. This one is not a particularly hard one. Give it a go. And when you have the answer, you can put it in the chat. All right, I'm going to call it. Let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, so we have an assumption question here. So I think of an assumption as a type of strengthen because we are finding the flaw and then we are finding the thing that is necessary for the argument to work. Right? It absolutely has to be true. And if it is not true, the argument shatters. It falls apart. All right. So it's a little bit different than a strengthen. It's a specific type of strengthen. A normal strengthen, you can go as far as you want. It can be the strongest strengthener in the world. With assumption, it is something that has to be true. So it's a strengthener, but it's kind of a more moderate strengthener. All right. So taking a look, in the past, traditional 2D films made by Hollywood studios have been considered more lucrative than 3D films. Nevertheless, a recent study has found that the most popular films from the past year use 3D techniques significantly more than less popular films did. Popular. This confirms that 3D films have become more lucrative than traditional 2D films. And a lot of folks pointed this out in the chat. Those words are not the same. So I saw that there was a little bit of discussion about what type of flaw this is. And the first thing I'll say is that it doesn't really matter. As long as you can identify it and figure out what's wrong with it, it doesn't really matter how we class it. But I had this as just straight up imprecise language because the language is changing. It's going from lucrative to popular to lucrative again. All right. So this is an imprecise language issue. All right, so what's wrong here? Well, we're saying, okay, it used to be that 2D was more lucrative, but recently 3D is more popular. So now we're trying to say that that means 3D is more lucrative just because it's more popular. And that might be true, right? More popular films get more people in theaters, makes more money, but that's not necessarily true, right? Maybe something that's less popular but is 3D might make more money because 3D tickets are more expensive. Don't know. So the problem here is that lucrative and popular are not necessarily the same thing. So what needs to be true for this argument to work? Popular has to equal lucrative. If that's not true, the argument is busted. Okay, so let's look at our answer choices. We want to find both the pieces of popular and lucrative in them. And the only one that has both of those pieces is E. The most popular films earn more money, lucrative, than less popular films. And we're done. Cool. So these other answer choices, we don't even have to consider them because they don't bring in the concept of money. All right. So if we take a look at D, that was kind of a popular one. The majority of films made in the past year were filmed exclusively in 3D. Does that matter? What does that have to do with money? What does that have to do with how lucrative each of those films is? Maybe most of them were 3D, but like the 3 films that weren't 3D, the 3 films that were 2D made a ton of money. See how that still it's not necessary for this argument to work. E is necessary. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. But another example of a common flaw in a GMAT question. All right, another one. Let's take 2 minutes, 2.5. See what we can do. Good luck. All right, we're going to go ahead and jump in because it seems like we're kind of in agreement here. So this is a strengthen question, strongly supports. But this is kind of an interesting one because if we look at the argument, the conclusion that the management team makes is that this expose has nothing to do with the drop in shoe sales. And that doesn't seem particularly supported by the premises that come before. For me, this is a lot like a paradox, right? So paradoxes are where we have these premises and we have this conclusion and they just don't seem to match up, right? There is a big flaw, right? The flaw is very obvious, it's huge, and we somehow have to rationalize it. That's kind of what's going on here. all right, where we have a big flaw. We have this expose, and it's really awful, right? They're using sweatshop labor, they're using child labor, and they experience this drop. Two things correlated, and they're saying it is not causal. Okay, so we want to strengthen that. We want to say it is not causal. So we are saying the expose did not lead to the drop in sales. We are trying to support that point. Okay, so this is correlation versus causation, but in kind of an interesting way, right? So we're going, okay, we want to say this expose did not lead to this drop in sales. So maybe there's a third thing, right? Maybe there is a third thing that's causing this drop in sales. We want to find a answer choice that suggests something along those lines. And the most popular answer here was E, and that one's correct. So this one's a little bit harder because we might actually kind of have to read through these answer choices to figure out if it does support that relationship. And E does. Other department stores that sell only shoes manufactured in the United States have also reported a decline in shoe sales this week. So what does that mean? So these are stores that are not using overseas sweatshops. They are not using child labor. They are not affected by this expose. They are also seeing a decline in sales. That points to it being a third thing. Maybe it's there's record inflation, or maybe it's just a week where people don't typically buy shoes. You know, that happens sometimes, right? It's fluctuations in the market. There's some third reason likely that is causing this drop in sales across shoe stores. So it's not the expose just leading to it. It is something else. So that leads to answer choice E. Someone said, hey, can we look at C really quickly? This was not the first time this journalist published an expose of some of the products sold in this department store. So this one's meant to mislead you, right? This isn't the first expose, but we don't know what happened when they published another expose. Maybe sales dropped then too. It doesn't support the idea that the expose was not leading to this drop in sales. Maybe every single time those exposés led to a drop in sales. See what I mean? So if it said they had previously published a similar expose and that did not lead to a drop in sales, maybe. It's a little bit generalization, but maybe, but that's not what this answer choice says. Maybe because, yeah, right. Maybe they're because the queen died, people aren't shopping. Yeah, absolutely. It could be a third thing. All right, one more bonus question. 2 minutes. Give this one a go. All right, we're starting to get answers in the chat. You can still add your answer, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to kick this one off. So this is a useful to evaluate question. So this is a type of weaken, or at least that's the way I like to class it. So with useful to evaluate, we are finding the flaw and we're just pointing it out. We're pointing out this piece of information that we don't need, that we don't have, but we need it. All right, so we know from this argument that there's a robust population of coyotes in this place. This company, Canic, has been releasing bromide into the air and groundwater. That sounds bad. The bromide is, some of these bromide compounds are suspected of compromising the immune systems of young coyote. So perhaps they are dangerous to young coyote. And then a recent study over the entire forest established that 30% of young coyote did not survive their first year of life. We've got a statistic. Interesting. Okay. 30% of young coyote did not survive their first year of life. That sounds really bad, right? Clearly, the bromide compounds released by Canic pose a direct threat to the well-being of coyote in the forest. Okay. So we've got a statistic and we've got this causal thing going on as well. So we've got maybe a little bit of a blend of correlation, causation, and statistics here. So all of this put together, it sounds bad, right? It sounds bad for these coyotes. However, that statistic is presented in isolation. We're saying, hey, 30% of young coyote did not survive their first year of life. Compared to what? Compared to what? What if there weren't bromide? Okay, what would happen then? What happens in forests where there is no bromide? How many young coyote die? Okay, if it's 10%, okay, it seems like maybe the bromide is leading to that coyote death. But what if it's 30%? With or without bromide? Uh-oh. That weakens the argument, right? So it may just be that this is a species that has a high youth mortality rate. Maybe 30% of young coyote die regardless. Since we have nothing to compare that statistic to, it's not helpful. So what we would like for a weakener here might be, what does that statistic mean? How does it compare to what happens normally without bromide? And that leads us straight to E. All right, we are dealing with a statistical problem. We see a statistical word that maybe should encourage us to look there. What percentage of healthy coyotes survive to adulthood in the wild? If it's 70%, that means 30% are dying. And it's not the bromide, it's something else. All right, so statistical question, statistical answer. All righty, and I see some other answers in here. A lot of folks are saying, A, we don't care about other animals. It doesn't matter, we care about coyote, right? So if we were talking about other animals, we can't generalize over to coyote. It's just not relevant to this argument. What's relevant here is that statistic about coyote and what it means. So it's a valid statistic, but we have nothing to compare it to, so we cannot interpret it in a valid way. Answer is E. Okay, now I have to run, unfortunately. So really quickly, our 5 most common CR flaws: imprecise language, generalization, correlation versus causation, necessary versus sufficient, and misleading statistics. If you have these 5 down and have your strategy for finding other sorts of flaws, which is exactly what we did through this whole thing, you can nail 75+% of CR questions. All right. I unfortunately do not have much time for Q&A. However, you can throw questions in the comments on this live stream, and GMAT Club does come in and answer some questions occasionally, or you can have other folks who are viewing these videos answer. So I'm sorry I can't stick around much longer, but thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. And again, remember to check out that MBA Spotlight Fair on Tuesday and Wednesday. And you can also go subscribe over on Magoosh GMAT's YouTube channel for more content from me and some other experts. Thanks again for being here. And I have another session coming up in a couple of weeks. So make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you're not. Thank you. See you later.